just to rehash a little bit about the Tuam thing, because we didn't really go into detail on it, and I thought maybe we lack. Just with the point, about the overall historiography of this. You see, people think, because you two make the point there, and historical issues, there's always two sides to it. And in Ireland there is a large number of historians who are in many cases very well paid. But I can tell you, this is it. This is the other side of the equation. Rory out there is the only person, apart from there was a book actually published after one of the inquiries in Dublin by a priest in Dublin. Apart from that, Rory's inquiry is the only person who's looking at some of these allegations and saying that actually this doesn't stack up or whatever. There isn't an army of people doing this. You'd think there was, but there isn't. And I know this because I've been ringing up people to try to speak at the seminar or whatever, and you'll find the very highly paid Irish historians, they don't want to know. To a very large extent, Eugene mentioned it there, they're afraid of feminists, that they're flat out completely paranoid, afraid. Another issue is a lot of them are employed by the state. Of course, they're all employed by the universities who are funded by the state. But actually, as well as that, this commission that we're talking about here employs huge numbers of historians as well. And so they all hope to get employed in that. And I was actually talking to an archaeologist, a postgrad archaeologist, just a few days ago, and he was saying that he wouldn't get involved in it because it hurt his career. And that's just the way it is. So people like there who might watch this seminar think, well, where are the great historians, whatever, they aren't there, they wouldn't speak out in a matter like this. So I thought maybe I would just in case there's people tuning in who don't know about the Tuam story exactly, of what's going on here, I thought I might just give you a simple timeline to it. So obviously, you have the Galway County Council, they amalgamated the Poor unions, 1921 to 22 or 3 or whatever, and they decided to create a specialised children's home for Galway, and they put it in Glenamady first and then in Tuam, and they just put abandoned children, if you like. It's a children's home in the same sense that you get an old people's home. You put people in an old people's home, state-run old people's home who can't be looked after at home or otherwise. And it's the same thing with children. It's a simple concept, although a lot of them would have been illegitimate as things evolved, because that's really, why they were abandoned, if you like. So that's what it is.
Even from birth, sort of?
What happened was, from birth, you see, what happened was they set up a maternity unit within the children's home. So that happens about the 1930s, I think the late 30s. So that would be then from birth, yes. In that sense, it'd be from before birth, if you like, that they would have, kind of been abandoned. Their own families would have thrown out the mothers, the expectant mothers. Unfortunately, that's what happened. Yes, they were abandoned. And you get all sorts of stories, children abandoned on trains, and etc., etc. So that's what it is, okay? That's what it is. It closes down 1961. So the Galway County Council set this up, and they asked the nuns to run it for them. So they're the overall managers, and they just asked this order to sort of, deal with the day-to-day issues. And then the nuns then had all this bureaucracy, and they would send down the great books to the county council, I think every month or something, you get it all signed up. And the county council also met in the children's home on a regular basis, the committee that ran the home. So that's it. They close autumn 1961. Now then you have Catherine Corris, who's a local historian in the locality, and she was doing a course on local history. She decided to do it on the children's home. So she comes along and she finds out from the local people the place of burial of the people of the children's home. She finds out this particular area, this recognised graveyard of the children's home. She goes back, she looks at that, and she compares it to a map from about there's a number of maps, maybe 1880s, 1890s, an Ordnance Survey map. And she puts one on top of the other, and lo and behold, the place that's the current graveyard of the children's home, it looks to be the same area as what's described as a cesspool of the old workhouse that the children's home was in. A cesspool meaning a sort of a... anyway, I'll describe the cesspool in a minute, but so if you look at the maps, it's true that this cesspool would take up, would say, about a third of the area of the current children's home, of the current graveyard of the children's home. Now that's the origin of the whole business of Tuam, in case people are wondering, where does this come from? That's the whole idea, nuns threw babies in a septic tank. It doesn't come from anything else, apart from maybe the marasmus reference that Eugene talked about. In the death certificates, it mentions marasmus, and that's completely misunderstood by the purveyors of this. But otherwise, that's it. It's these maps show the cesspool, therefore nuns threw bodies in a septic tank. There's nothing else out there, no eyewitness or anything, or documentary anything. So let's look at this for a minute. What do we mean by those maps? Now, when the workhouses were built, 1842, I think, 1840 to 42 in this case, they didn't have a sewage system at all. In case people are wondering, of course they didn't, because they didn't have running water except a pump in one of the yards. Now, you can't have a sewage system unless you've got pumped running water, which they didn't have when they built it. So it starts off without a sewage system as we understand it. It had what you might call, in simple terms, a hole in the ground. That's all that in various places. We call them latrines, whatever. It's just a glorified hole in the ground. You have your toilet on top, stuff goes down, and you clean it out periodically. So they cleaned it out periodically, but then they found the necessity to create a structure overground to hold it in case you get huge amounts of rain. In other words, if I pile sewage, manure in a corner of a field, rain comes along, it all gets messed up because, so all they do is they create a kind of a square on the surface of the ground. That's all it is. It's a square, like walls that high, we'll say, surrounding that area like that. And then they come along with the ass and cart, put the manure into it. That's what we mean by the cesspool. It's just, as I say, it's walls in the normal way of old stone-cut walls, but also wattle, W-A-T-T-L-E, intertwined in the walls in order to keep them waterproof, because they found that. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about this cesspool, right? It's an overground square box. It's all it is, just 4 walls. And so therefore, it isn't really important to know that a structure occurs later in an area like that, if you think about it. It's a bit like you walk down the street tomorrow morning and you see an area where they have put manure temporarily on the surface of the ground. A few years later, they take it away. What's the big deal? I mean, you could have anything underneath that ground later on, and it just doesn't matter. And that's the simple situation about the children's home. Now, they did have sewage later, and it gets complicated. There's another smaller structure where they did have sewage in this particular area. They found that in their famous excavations, and they didn't find any bodies in that area. So it gets kind of complicated. Anyway, she starts off this controversy. And the other thing to point out, by the way, is that's the current graveyard of the children's home, that she matches to this area where you have the cesspool. The fact is that the original graveyard of the children's home, when the nuns were there, would be vastly bigger. It probably goes the whole length of the bottom of the workhouse. So it's a vastly bigger area than the current children's home. In other words, you look at the current children's home graveyard, and maybe the cesspool is, whatever it is, a third of that size. But actually, the real graveyard at the time the nuns were there is vastly bigger, and therefore there's no reason to believe that they buried anywhere near there. Anyway, she launches this inquiry. The hype is enormous. The government sets up a commission of investigation. It employs archaeologists, historians, and a vast amount of lawyers. It's really run by lawyers. It's a former Supreme Court judge, or High Court judge, who's the head of it. The second is a fellow called Duncan from Trinity, another lawyer. These are the 3 members of the commission. After that, the person who draws up the reports is another barrister. So it's a very legal thing. Anyway, this commission hoovers up all of the information related to it. There are files within the National Archives on this home, etc. They seize them and they stop historians getting anywhere near them. Then they release nothing for about 2 or 3 years, at the time when there's a huge media hype about it, and where really people come away with the impression, which is a totally wrong impression. Then they issue 1-page statement, a totally mischievous PR job, deliberately to hype up and to fuel this hysteria, in my opinion. They issue just 1-page, completely misleading statement in about, whatever that is, 2017. And then they shut up shop again. And then only in, I think it's whatever it was, March of last year, did they release anything we're talking about. Then they released a huge documentation, about 500-600 pages, goes into great detail. And hopefully I've been able to address what they come up with in this book. So the idea behind this seminar is that, you see, that there is other talks out there where I anyway have gone into great detail on this, and I wasn't going to just repeat what I'd said there. So if you go on the internet, type up Tuam book launch riot, you'll see a very long lecture on the subject. And if you're interested, you can read my book. It's called Tuam Babies, and that goes into great detail as well.
Can you just hold it up again?
Yeah, it's just that there. 11.